It happens to be the International Day for Biodiversity, which is a United Nations global event held on the 22nd of May each year. The aim is to promote and raise global awareness on issues related to the planet's biodiversity. This year's theme is Our Solutions Are Found in Nature, at a time when Kenya, like the rest of the world, is dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, just to bring us up to speed with the latest in terms of the importance of this particular day and the biodiversity as well, even as we cope with the effects of COVID-19, I'd like us to bring on board Nancy Githaiga, who's joining us by way of Zoom. She's experienced in biodiversity, the policy and research and innovation lead at Worldwide Fund for Nature Kenya. Thank you so much for joining us, Nancy. We're definitely glad to have you right here in News Center. I think it would be proper to start with basing the importance of biodiversity, because right now it's a concept that seems difficult to understand or appreciate, or maybe let alone regulate, bearing in mind what exactly we're dealing with as a country, as a globe. Let's begin with that, the importance of biodiversity, especially during COVID-19.
Thank you very much, Jesse. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can.
Of course. Hello?
Yes, we can. Kindly continue.
Thank you very much. Of course, today, as we mark the International Day of Biodiversity, we would have been found out there either planting trees, taking care of the environment, and so on. But of course, because of COVID-19, then this finds us in our homes and with very little activity out there. Yet, of course, biodiversity is a very, very important natural capital for any country globally, and especially for countries in Africa, for Kenya, which is an 80% nature-based economy. And when we talk about biodiversity, we are basically speaking about everything from the water we drink, to the forests, to the soils that we plant our crops on, everything that surrounds us, our environment, the air we breathe, and so on. But for many years, I think the importance of this biodiversity, what we have continued to do as citizens of the world, of Kenya, is to draw from this natural capital with the assumption that, it is endless. But I think with COVID-19 and with the challenges that we are increasingly going to get, the importance of biodiversity can then not be underscored, because as we mark today, we are saying our solution is actually in nature. And I can give an example. All the drugs, actually, almost all the drugs, if we look at even drugs coming from the United States, for instance, about 118 out of the 150 drugs that are prescriptive drugs come from nature, from living organisms. We are talking about some from plants, some coming from fungi, and so on. So our solutions are in nature. If we are able to protect nature, then it is able to protect us back.
All right, and one thing that's usually overlooked is the fact that, our health in one way or the other is actually linked to the planet's health. And I'm not sure many people might fathom this particular statement, but since it's in line with the theme of this year's celebration, that's Our Solutions Are in Nature, let's delve deeper into this. What exactly should people know about the importance of biodiversity?
I think I'll bring us closest home, drinking water, for instance.
True.
Which is one of the things that we get from nature and from natural resources. And we are always saying it is one of these things we have not been able to substitute. So if we do not have water in nature, if it is not provided, we still have no substitute yet. So if you look at water and you look at waterborne diseases like diarrhea, you find that most young children die from diarrhea even now in the 20th century. Yet, if only we invested in clean water, if only we invested in ensuring we have no pollution in our water resources or our water sources, then we wouldn't have to deal with diarrhea or cholera that we are currently dealing with in Turkana and in other areas because of flooding and so on. So it is actually that close to home. And from economists, and we talked about economics this morning and the economics of COVID, if we invested $1, say in clean water, we are able to save $7 to actually $20 in health. So instead of treating people downstream, instead of treating people from typhoid, from cholera, if only we invested $1 upstream, it would be able to save us $7 and more downstream. And generally, I think the figures we talk about, if we invested $1 in environment, we're able to get returns that go up to between $30 and $40 in returns in terms of health.
Okay,
so
well,
that is how.
All right, we're living in a time of environment degradation, and one way or the other, nature has no voice. I mean, if you cut down a tree, unless someone actually speaks up about it, then it might go unnoticed, but the effects are far-fetched. Now, in terms of bending this curve, in terms of biodiversity laws, what exactly should you recommend? How exactly should we look at this?
Thanks, Jesse. I think you've said well. Nature has no voice, but when it speaks, it actually thunders. And we've seen that in the last 1 month or so with the flooding. When we cut a tree and I make charcoal with the tree, when I clear the fields and I leave the soil bare, what I'm not thinking about is in the next rains, all the waters that should actually have percolated into the ground is going to be, to be carried out as to run off, what we call surface runoff. The reason why, for instance, in Busia, in the past, if it rained in the Cherangani Hills, it would probably take 3 weeks before the floods could be felt downstream. But as we speak now, as soon as it rains today, then there will be a flood, meaning that our actions are actually pushing us, and pushing us to those extreme events that we are actually getting. So your action and my voice to raise the voice of biodiversity laws high up the political agenda would be very important. And we are saying similarly to the way we look at climate change. Today, if you listen globally, we talk about climate change, we talk about the Paris Agreement, we talk about investing to ensure that we actually manage climate change. But biodiversity, who speaks about it? So we do need to ensure that we are speaking about nature, which is our natural capital, the same way, same voice as we speak about economics. In the near future, of course, there's going to be a lot of input, as we go post-COVID-19 economically. What will that mean for our environment? Shall we, be developing even as we mess or compromise the environment which we live in, and which becomes very, very difficult to bend the curve? But it is possible to bend the curve. Of course, currently we've lost almost 60% of our natural capital as a globe, as a continent, as a country. And what I mean by this is, if you just look at an example of freshwater resources, those who lived in Nairobi know that you could use water from Nairobi River for drinking or irrigation or washing a few years, like 40 years ago. Today, that river is dead, meaning we have completely lost it. And to get it back, we can get there, but it's going to take us resources and a long time to get it back to where it was. So that loss is what we must look at bending, whether it is natural resources in terms of fresh water, or it is natural resources in terms of wildlife, which for Kenya we have lost almost 68%, and so on. Whether it is pollinators, actually, unfortunately, we are also losing pollinators, the bees, the butterflies that pollinate our crops, and we are still talking about food production. So we shall have the seed, but we shall not have the pollinators. So we must look at seeing how then do we bend this curve of biodiversity loss, which means it would be you as an individual and Nancy as an individual, corporates looking at the planet as well as their businesses, and of course then government taking this matter very, very seriously, that we have no other home and the natural resource we have is finite.
All right, now the intricate balance between, human existence and biodiversity is also very important. And I think a few lessons can be learned during this COVID-19 times. More people have been encouraged to stay at home. And all of a sudden, you hear news that we can see Mount Kenya or Mount Kilimanjaro from a certain distance. I mean, you can even hear perhaps birds in the air chirping even louder than before. So what lessons can we learn, even during times of distress like this, that might actually give us a positive outlook going forward in how better to deal with our biodiversity?
Yeah, I think I have seen very beautiful pictures of Mount Kenya and a few others of the pyramids in Egypt. But I think what we are saying is that what people have seen and what Kenyans have seen during this period is a reduction in air pollution. And that is mainly in the cities like the city of Nairobi. So where we have a lot of traffic, air pollution from traffic and so on, that has reduced significantly. Of course, we are expecting this to come back post-COVID. But what this is telling us is, we can have cleaner air, we can still develop, but we do need to develop in a way that can be sustained. Currently, we are saying, of course, Nairobi has extremely high levels of high pollution. And if you look at those levels of high pollution and how they make us vulnerable, even to, ailments, even COVID, would make me more vulnerable as a resident of Nairobi than someone else because of the air pollution, which would make me vulnerable as a person. So I think we can still develop, and there is beauty, we can see the birds, but we are also saying we have messed up our green spaces. I think we need those green spaces to remain as they are. They are our carbon sinks, but this can only happen if there is that balance. We must develop, but it must be sustainable. We must develop today as our generation, but we must remember that tomorrow's generation will also require the resources we have. So it is that balance that we must actually look for.
Well, thank you so much, Nancy Githaiga. And something that you said earlier on still is with me, that Kenya is a nature-based economy. So this should be an all-important discussion across all sectors, even the political field as well. Nancy Githaiga, thank you so much for your time. She's an expert in biodiversity and a policy research and innovation lead at Worldwide Fund for Nature Kenya. All right, let's take a look at what's happening elsewhere. Crossing borders, over 200